Hello and welcome to the CX Files for 5th January 2023. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Happy New Year, Mark. I'm Peter Ryan, based in Montreal. It's so nice to see you and so nice to be back on the CX Files for another great year.
Well, I think this is the fifth or sixth year of CX Files. So,
Yep.
It's going strong. We're going to be almost up to episode 300 fairly soon. So, it's getting packed full of content in the back catalog. The library is full of interviews.
Yeah, it is. And, as we consider, Mark, the global nature that we talked about on our last episode of the CX Files, we have been fortunate enough, at least as long as I've been listening and fortunate enough to be on the podcast as a co-host, to have pretty well all major and emerging CX markets represented. I think about the fact that we're able to welcome guests from countries as diverse as the US, the UK, Germany, all the way to emerging destinations, including Rwanda, Georgia, and Malta.
And Malta, of course, is always included. I think that, at some point we should maybe add up and try to find all of the countries that have been mentioned on this podcast. Although, who knows how many words there would be if we did a transcript of everything.
Well, I think there would be a lot of words. There would be a lot of substantive mind share that would come out on that. But yeah, we are very lucky to talk to so many different people who come from our existing networks and quite frankly, our own networks that have been expanded over the nearly 300 podcasts that have been done. A lot of people don't realize this, but Mark and I spend a lot of time looking to try and figure out who will be a guest that's going to be provocative, that's going to bring some good mind share. And while we're very fortunate to have nice, robust networks of people, many of which we're connected with on LinkedIn, there's also many cases where we actually go looking for guests, and we almost, I'd say, Mark, we almost cold call them in a way, asking them if they'd like to be on the podcast. And not everybody responds positively, but the ones that do respond positively end up becoming very much, I would say, valued members of our professional network. And we're very fortunate and we're very thankful that we've been able to make these connections through the pod.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that most of the time I do actually reach out and try to get people interested. They are generally quite interested in talking because they can see from the back catalogue of interviews that there's a great mix of people there, and it's a very independent view. I mean, we're never sort of pushing the BPO line or the analyst line or whatever, so we get views from right across the industry on this pod. And I suppose that sort of leads into the interview that we've got to kick off 2023, because
Indeed,
I saw you in London in November, and unfortunately, because our diaries were sort of full when we were traveling, we ended up only being able to spend about an hour or 90 minutes in a pub together. But there was a couple of other people who joined us there. You had spent some time that day with Mark Walton, and he came and joined us in the pub. And Mark, he used to be the chief executive of Sensée, and we did actually have him on the pod probably a year and a half ago in that role. And Sensée, of course, is well known for being 100% work from home contact center company. So for about 20 years, they've been just doing work from home. But recently Mark launched a new business, which is also focused on work from home. It's called Cloudbase Partners, and they have a product called Flex at Home. And essentially what they're doing is offering an audit service to check, audit, whether people are complying to regulations or health and safety regulations. So it's like being able to sort of go one step further with work from home and actually apply a sort of formal audit process on whether you're not only meeting industry regulations. So if you're working in financial services, for example, then of course you need to follow certain rules and regulations, but even just basic health and safety for the agents, because at the end of the day, we have seen this emergency period through the pandemic when people just had to go home and make it work, whether they were at their kitchen table or on the ironing board. But now we're far beyond that. Now this is an accepted process and a way of making BPO work. But if companies are not looking after their work from home agents, then I expect at some point we can start expecting to see lawsuits coming down the track.
Well, you raise a very, very good series of points, and I think this is crucial in terms of the discussion that you had with Mark, and certainly the interactions that Mark is continuing to have with people who are deploying this work from home model. At the end of the day, I think we have to realize that there was a lot of Band-Aid surgery going on in 2020 through to 2022 as organizations coped with home working, but now it's becoming much more of a structural thing. And the liability that organizations, whether it's captives or BPOs, could potentially incur if somebody was performing a role in a designated workspace on a frontline function, the liability is something that needs to be taken into account. This is going to differ jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some locations, as we know, are much more litigious than others, but effectively what Cloudbase Partners is proposing is the solution that is taking a huge amount of that liability risk out of the home working environment. And I'll tell you right now, when I saw the demo that Mark and his team provided for me, I walked away impressed. And Mark, as you know, you're like me. We've seen it all. We've seen millions of demos. It takes a lot to get my attention and to keep it. This managed to do so, and I think that this is going to be a big solution for the 2023 period and beyond.
Yeah, and of course, the purpose of this interview and the discussion is not just to sort of flag up Mark's company, but the point is that at some point we have to accept that work from home is becoming normal. In which case, we need to pay attention to the health and safety of the workers to ensure that they're following all the regulations that are required from within their industry. But then we also need to focus on the question of how do we build up a team culture when we've started to accept that we've got distributed workers, because we have to move on from this mindset of the, casual Friday at the office and all this kind of thing, wearing funny hats and fancy dress. The traditional sort of methods that are deployed to help people have fun at work no longer apply at all. And so how do you build a team culture in this very distributed sort of environment? So we went through this whole suite of discussions together, but effectively the sort of summary is, now that work from home and hybrid working is here to stay, how do we actually make it work properly?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. How do we make it work properly? And that just doesn't take into account agent management. It also comes down to the environment that the agent happens to be working in, and making sure that from a standards and practice angle that it's going to be as compliant as possible. And this is exactly where I think the solution takes us. So shall we go to the interview and hear what you and Mark have to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go to the first interview of 2023 on CX Files with Mark Walton. Okay, hi Mark. It's great to get you back on the podcast again. I think it was more than a year or so since we talked to you here.
Yes, I think we were still in the thick of second wave of lockdown, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the work from home conversation back then. Now, you've got this background in work from home management. So you were leading Sensée at the time when we talked to you before. And you've got a new venture, Flex at Home, which is focused on work from home, health, safety, and compliance. So before we kick off, because we're going to talk about work from home, compliance and regulation, and this is kind of exactly what your new venture is doing. So what inspired you to create this new business?
Well, I can't take the credit for starting it off, but I got together with a group of very smart individuals probably about 6 months ago, who have been in this industry, our industry, for quite a long time. So people like Glenn Hurley and Peter Hubbard and Felix Clark. And they had been working on a proposition based on the fact that working from home is well underway, clearly, and the hybrid world is here to stay. And most organizations have really got to grips with the telephony, the technology required, all of that good stuff. The bit they don't seem to have got to grips with is the health and safety and employee well-being piece of working from home. So I got together with the team and they showed me this app that has been created that enables a really compliant, high focus on precisely that area of the business, enables organizations with large numbers of hybrid employees to be working from home safely, securely, and very specifically to be able to prove that they're working from home safely and securely, because what we're about, we'll talk about it more in terms of the challenges of home working, but what we're about to see is an explosion in claims of employees who either are not working in safe conditions at home or have decided to claim against their employers for not having safe working conditions at home. And as you know, we as employers have exactly the same legal responsibilities towards our employees, regardless of where they're based. So in a nutshell, I just think this product is remarkable. I haven't seen anything else like it on the market. It answers a lot of problems that a lot of organizations have got around health, safety and well-being. And so that's what we're doing. We're in the process of getting that off the ground.
That's really interesting because, during the pandemic, we saw this kind of emergency shift to work from home, and everybody just had to make it work because that was really the only game in town at the time. But it now, this idea of remaining at home or at least having a hybrid has just become sort of accepted and expected by a lot of employees now. So do you think that there's more hidden aspects that of work from home that have been overlooked? I know, I mean, just thinking out loud, I think one of the things that immediately came out of the pandemic experience was the sense of isolation. Lots of people found that they were stuck working from home when they expected to be in an office with their team, and they had no way of replicating that kind of socializing online. So are there lots of things we are actually overlooking?
Yeah, I mean, I think, hybrid working is here to stay. The last survey we did at Sensée indicated it was something like 93% of all organizations are going to keep hybrid working. And I think that's just a given. As I said earlier on, a lot of organizations have got to grips with this tech around that, but there are some areas that are severely lacking. And I think mental health and well-being is a huge one. I think physical safety is another. I think data security is another, and staff engagement and the whole area of building a company persona, if you like, particularly where you've got people who are purely home-based. So I think all of those areas have not necessarily been overlooked. They've been lower down the priority list. And again, what I think we're seeing, and we're going to see an awful lot more of, is all of the regulators are going to get much more interested in this now. So not only is, clearly looking after your employees the right thing to do from a health and well-being perspective, but there's all sorts of regulators going to be all over this in the coming year, whether that be the health and safety executive or the FCA or whoever it is. From their own perspective, I think they're going to start baring their teeth, whereas clearly through the whole COVID period it was best endeavors that were acceptable, but that's not going to be the case in 2023 onwards.
Yeah, and you mentioned that we may well start seeing lawsuits where employees actually say that their employer is not protecting them in their work environment. And I can imagine that in large companies, especially in the kind of organizations that we often talk to, have large numbers of people working in customer service. So you could be talking hundreds or even thousands of people working from home. And connected together on similar projects. So I mean, you could even imagine a class action of people getting together and saying we're not being protected. I mean, is that realistic? I mean, is that something that you think might be coming down the track next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely coming down the track. It's just a question of when. So we've had lots of conversations with regulators, with lawyers. We spoke to some unions. We've tried to get under the skin of this, and I think we're seeing it more already in the US. But the numbers of claims against employers by employees are starting to rise and starting to increase. And if you look at, you've only got to Google this now, and you'll see that quite a few lawyer firms are starting to offer no win, no fee. And this, I'm not quite sure it's going to get to the same as the PPI epidemic, but it's kind of going in that direction. In the US, you're starting to see TV adverts for this, and it's based on the fundamental principle, as we said earlier on, that as an employer, you have exactly the same rights and responsibilities of your staff on the days, or if they are home workers, when they're working at home. And so I think what people will be prone to do, it's slips and trips, it's backache, it's RSI, repetitive stress. So all sorts of claims I think are going to come out of the woodwork. So there are sort of two elements to this. One is companies need to think about the processes that they've got in place to protect themselves, i.e., are they making sure that their employees are in a safe and secure home working environment? But they've also got to be able to prove it. So, they cannot rely anymore on hoping that the forms have been filled out correctly. They've got to be able to prove that that's the case. So that's I think the exciting opportunity for Flex and for Cloudworks is the app enables that. But I think then there will be lots of other regulatory issues which also need to be solved. So from a financial service perspective, FCA requirements that your people are working from home in a secure environment. They're not working in the kitchen or in the living room where other people can see the screen. They're not working in an office which is on a ground floor where people can have a look through the window and see the screen. Those sorts of things need to be proved. And I think the regulators are going to get much more up to speed with that.
Yeah, and a lot of these conversations around regulation focus on the technology that people are using in the home environment. Do they have a private workstation? Are they using bring your own device? This kind of stuff around can they copy information off their system at home? But I guess what you're talking about is actually that's only one part of what you're talking about. It's a much bigger discussion.
Yes, I mean, I think the technology piece was the relatively easy to solve piece. So at Sensée, we had over 1,000 people working from home all the time, never came into an office, and they also worked in a bring your own device environment. So companies like Sensée, and I think Sensée was leading the way on this, were able to lock down the home computer, the home work environment technologically, and make sure it was completely secure and completely visible and completely recordable. So I think the tech bit is relatively easy. The hard bit is making sure that, how do you know that somebody hasn't just walked in and they're taking notes over your shoulder kind of thing? Or if you're in a student house, everyone's in the background whilst you're working on fairly sensitive information. So I think it's the physicality is the next big challenge. Technology will be a part of that, of course. So yeah, I think that's a big issue. It's the physicality piece, over and above the fact that you've got to have people when they're in a hybrid environment working in a professional environment. So you and I are both working reasonably professionally at the moment. We can see each other. We're in our home offices, but you can't have people working from their beds. You can't have people working off ironing boards, as we've heard all the horror stories, with cables all around them. It's got to be safe and it's got to be secure.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you a couple more general work from home questions, given your experience in the industry. And I saw some data recently from Stanford, published by Professor Nick Bloom, where he was talking about a big productivity gap. Employees actually think they're much more productive at home, but managers believe there's a decline in productivity. And I mean, did you ever explore these kind of questions when you were managing people at Sensée or other like large work from home teams you've worked with?
Yeah, no, I did it with Sensée, and also when I was leading a company called Arise in Europe, that large volumes of people working from home. And in both those instances, we we thought we had, and we could demonstrate that we had a productivity uplift against a traditional working environment of between 25 and 30%. So it's such an interesting area because you're going to get lots of different feedbacks from people as to whether some people think it's more efficient, some people think it's less efficient. What it ultimately comes down to is not, is it home working, is it hybrid working, is it office working? It's the actual specific model of each. So, for example, at Sensée, what we had was a model that recruited people who fully expected to be working from home. They were set up properly for working from home. They were managed properly to be working from home. They enjoyed it because they'd chosen to do it. And the flexibility of that work from home model meant that they worked not only at a time that suited them, that they chose, but also fed that into when it was busy, so they were fully productive. So what you move towards in that model is an outcomes-based metric of management, rather than just thinking about people sat in a place doing a job. It's less about where they're sitting and more about what they're doing. And, clearly, if you've got people who have chosen to work in a certain way, working when they're required, but not sitting around when they're not required, it makes it hugely efficient. So it's not, and we'll start to move away from, I think, a simplistic question, is it at home or in the office? I think we'll start to think about who's doing the work, how do they feel about what they're doing, and when are they doing it?
I think that that's a really important point, and kind of leads into what I was going to ask you, which was, I really wanted to ask about social culture and how do you get a team to connect together when they're all in disparate locations. But I think that maybe you've kind of partially answered it there by saying, in the first place, you get people who want to work like that.
Yeah, I think that, again, is a hugely interesting point. So when I started to lead Sensée as chief exec, it was about a year and a half before the pandemic, before lockdown started. So I would spend most of my time then evangelizing the model of home working. So it was pure home working. And at that time, only about 20% of organizations thought that this was a reasonably good idea. Everyone else thought we were bonkers for lots of different reasons that we've touched on, security and productivity and all of the rest of that stuff. And one of the biggest areas of concern always was, how do you create the company culture? How do you create staff engagement in a home or hybrid working environment? And I won't mention the names of the companies, but these are some of the biggest organizations with the largest numbers of employees in the UK would talk about their company culture. And yet, if you looked at the outputs of that company culture, this was pre-COVID, but what their staff attrition rates were like in the customer contact centers, yes, they were spending a fortune on their brand building and engagement initiatives, but the staff still hated them. They were still leaving in droves. They've got dreadful staff retention, and I think that really sort of starts to point towards the salient point for this, which is, again, it's not about where your people are based necessarily and how much you're spending on staff engagement. It's how genuinely happy your employees are, and are they working in a way that suits them? And so what I mean by that is, if you ask, and Sensée do this very well, where do people actually want to work from? What hours do they want to work? What are their other life commitments? Have they got children to drop off at school? Are they disabled? So there are all sorts of issues. They might not want to go into a specific type of working environment. So for everybody that wants to work from an office, there will be somebody who is better suited to working from home. And it doesn't mean one or the other model is right. It just means that each individual's got their own requirements. And therefore, if you enable people to work in a way that suits them, they are going to be naturally more engaged. And then, of course, you have to think about how you use technology to continue that communication and to drive that staff engagement. But ultimately, if you really care about what your employees are thinking and how they're feeling, there's no better way to create a company culture and staff engagement, in my view.
Yeah, I read some research from Harvard very recently in the last couple of weeks that was looking at the comparison of giving employees agency and control over their working hours, their working environment, giving them flexibility. So if they have a family emergency, they can take the next day off. So all of this kind of flexibility, it's 10 times or it's valued 10 times more than salary. So as a driver for quitting the job. So I think that points back to exactly what you're saying about attrition. If you go to a traditional contact center environment where the managers are putting in a pool table and making people wear hats on Fridays and all this kind of thing, exactly. Does that really give them the flexibility to organize their work around their life?
Yeah, I think it's a more mature approach to working and where work fits into people's lives. So again, referring back to lockdown, everyone, I think, reevaluated their working environment and where work fits into their lives. And what we're seeing now, of course, with the economy, I think we've still got 1.3 million open job vacancies in the UK alone. People have got choice, and there are still some nations out there led from the top where there's been an insistence of everybody needs to work in a certain way. They need to get back into the office, or they've been very prescriptive about what days of the week that is. And I think those organizations are struggling because even if people continue and say, okay, well, we'll go along with that, what they're really doing is they're looking elsewhere for a role that is equally satisfying, but provides that work-life balance, enables people to work in that certain way. So I fully believe if you make sure as an employer, you're meeting the needs of your employees and treating them fairly and having grown-up conversations with them, as you said, it's been proved time and time again, there are issues more important than salary. And so with the difficulty of recruiting and retaining people at the moment, that it's just essential that you really listen to your employees and create a working environment and an operational process that really enables them to work in a way that suits them.
Okay, so just to wrap up then, like on a final note, we're just going into 2023 now. So what are you looking forward to this year? Work from home is definitely here to stay, but do you think that we're going to start seeing an end to these kind of endless debates around, should you be in the office on Wednesday and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think absolutely. So yes, hybrid is here to stay, whether you like it or not. And if you don't agree with it, well, that's fine. But all of the people you would otherwise have employed, they're going to have left anyway and gone and worked somewhere else. So that's not to say that the home working model is the right one. It's about making sure that you've got options for your employees, I believe. And I think the debate will change because it isn't really about where they're sitting. It's about getting the whole organization to think about how to get productivity up and get work done in the best way possible. And so that means your recruitment teams, your onboarding teams, your operational management teams, all of the metrics that you're managing by and checking on have to be done in a slightly different environment, which isn't location based. So it's about what are you actually trying to do? And ultimately, we're all in the customer care and customer service industry. So it's about how do we provide service in the best way possible? And what I hope and pray is that we don't have the same situation whereby at the moment, and I've been on the phone this morning sorting out various different banking and utility issues, we stop having these stupid IVR messages saying, sorry that we're experiencing it. Particularly high customer demand at the moment. You're not, this is the world moving forward. This is just normal. How are you going to provide a service that's good for the customer in a way that also is good for the employee? And it's not going to be, is it office or is it home based? It's going to be thinking far more intelligently around that. So my hope is that, clearly from a personal point of view, that we get Cloudbase and Flex off the ground and start to help employees working in a better home environment, and also employers enabling themselves to manage that much more easily, but at a much wider level, I hope that we find a way of creating good customer service roles so that we can start to address some of those 1.3 million open vacancies and provide better customer satisfaction ultimately.
Right, Mark, that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, great to talk to you, and thank you, Mark.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.